Audio Sorceress presents the unabridged recording of Unmasked, Blake Brier, Book 1, written by L.T. Ryan and Gregory Scott, narrated by Scott Brick. Chapter 1. The 2 train pulled into the Wall Street station at 8:01 a.m. and the doors opened. Eli Butler forced his way through the Brooklyn-bound, squeezing himself out onto the platform. For 6 steps, he walked behind a woman looking down at her phone, apparently oblivious to the human traffic patterns she was disrupting. He saw a gap and made his move. He passed the sluggish woman, then darted left and right around the other meanderers. He fell in behind a smartly dressed man, Wall Street type, who moved swiftly and blazed a path through the crowd. Eli drafted him, taking advantage of the space he carved out, as they both maneuvered in a synchronized zigzag pattern. Eli tried to will the sweat from beading up on his forehead. The perspiration was caused partly from the exertion, and partly from what his boss would say when he was late for the 3rd time this week. The daily hour-long trip from 242nd Street on the 1 train stayed on schedule. The delay arose when transferring to the 2 train at Chambers Street. Eli repeated flimsy excuses to himself as he climbed the stairs and emerged into the cacophony of the city street. Despite his tardiness, he paused for a moment and took a deep, meditative breath. Eli loved the smell of New York City in the morning. It was a mixture of car fumes, asphalt, exhaust from the various restaurants' kitchens, and, strangely enough, urine. He was not sure if he imagined the urine smell, but he distinctly detected it nonetheless. The smell of the city street always calmed him, even as he stressfully hurried toward an inevitable ass-chewing. It never failed to give him pause. It made him consider that there is a bigger picture, a larger world to be experienced. He jogged the last 100 yards to the corner of Wall Street and Water Street. He breezed into the lobby of 95 Wall Street and called the elevator. The building seemed eerily empty at 8:09 a.m., a marked difference from the usual chaos of 7:55. The elevator arrived and Eli rode it alone to the 14th floor. The doors opened to a brightly lit vestibule. Frosted glass obscured the busy operation bustling behind the semi-opaque inner doors. Lettering was etched in the large glass panels. IPFG Financial, Corporate Security Headquarters. Eli was truly appreciative to have his job and the hundreds of hours of training that came along with it. He knew, with only a high school diploma under his belt, it was better than many of his other options. Plus, as a video surveillance specialist, monitoring over 300 IPFG branches and facilities, Eli had season tickets to what he routinely called the shit show. Robberies, car crashes, domestic flights, and even the occasional workplace romantic encounter. He was operating the video camera controls during an event 1 year prior in which an irate former IPFG employee, Thomas Shegren, walked into a Tulsa satellite office with an AR-15. The guy's intention was to kill his former boss, VP of Sales Steve Winters, but he never got the chance. Serendipitously, Winters had called in sick that day. The word was that he was nursing a hangover. A couple of witnesses later reported seeing him doing an uncounted number of brightly colored shots at a 20-year high school reunion the night before. In the end, Shegren ended up firing a few rounds into Winter's desk and computer screen, but otherwise left the employees unharmed. After failing to locate his target, he fled the building only to be apprehended a few minutes later, due in part to information provided by Eli Butler. Eli received an award from the company and was later invited to a banquet held at a Washington, D.C. hotel, but he could not afford to make the trip. He was secretly proud of the recognition, even though he disparaged the whole premise whenever it was mentioned by his co-workers. For Eli, there was a sharp distinction between being appreciative and being satisfied. Eli wanted real action. To be physically involved, not looking on like some perverted voyeur. He had been trying for several years to land a job with the New York City Police Department, but kept falling short for one reason or another. On his latest try, he passed the written exam, the physical agility, and the polygraph, but was rejected after the psychological test. He was not sure exactly why he failed. They didn't tell him specifically. He did not feel crazy. But then again, he thought at the time, you would have to be relatively sane to be aware that you weren't. Despite the rejection, Eli wasn't deterred. He probably should have been, but it wasn't in his nature. He was fond of the cliché, if at first you don't succeed, and he'd surely come to live by it. Eli opened the big glass doors, turned right, and made a beeline past reception and the main floor of the office, toward the video surveillance department. He passed by Julie and Philippa, who didn't even turn in their cubicles to acknowledge him. He noticed his boss, Matthew Peterson, across the large room by the long windows overlooking a panoramic view of lower Manhattan. Eli was relieved that Peterson's attention seemed to be directed toward a group of 4 individuals huddled around him. Peterson was motioning toward the windows while speaking, as if he were explaining the layout of the city to the group. Matthew Peterson was in his 60s, and the only hair he had left was wrapped around his head near his ears, leaving the top of his head a gleaming, polished orb. Peterson stood about 5 feet 10 inches, a full 5 inches shorter than Eli's lanky frame. However, the head of security's broad shoulders and deep voice gave him a commanding presence. His temper was often short, and Eli preferred to avoid having it directed at him. The sum of Eli's height, high and tight haircut, and permanent 5 o'clock shadow should have made him an imposing character himself, but when he spoke, he came across as a bit simple, giving him a disarming quality. With Peterson distracted, Eli scurried down the short hallway and opened the heavy door marked VSCCC. "It's about time," said Andre Lopes as he grabbed his bag and headed toward the door. "Oh, and Peterson's pissed." Eli could tell Andre was irritated. Who wouldn't be? It was policy that no one could leave until relieved by the oncoming shift. Andre had clearly had enough. His eyes were sunken and glassy, a byproduct of staring at the wall of nearly 50 screens for hours on end. Eli knew the feeling. The burning, itching, dry eyes, the dull migraine headache, being staved off only by a steady diet of Excedrin and coffee. 8 hours in the darkened room was bad enough during the day, but Eli couldn't fathom how Andre Lopes and the other third shifters could stomach staring at motionless screens throughout the night. Eli had covered a shift for Andre once and barely made it 3 hours before falling into a ridiculous cycle of dozing and startling himself awake. He'd bounce up with vigor and devote his full energy and attention to his assigned task. No more than 30 seconds would go by before he found himself powerless to stop his eyelids from drooping under their own weight again. Day or night, the fact that the entire interior of the room, aside from the dark gray commercial tile on the floor, had been painted black, made it feel like a gloomy, albeit spacious tomb. "Sorry, Dre, I owe you," Eli called out as the door was closing behind his zombified friend. Eli sat in a large swiveling chair as he scootered himself up to the crescent-shaped desk. 3 identical desks sat side by side in the middle of the room. There was at least 15 feet of empty space on all sides, more on the side facing the video screens. For the most part, only one desk was used, although all 3 stations offered identical control capability. There was only one specialist manning the control center during each shift, and all of them preferred the center console. Eli felt it to be more symmetrical, sitting in the middle. It gave him a more uniform view of the wall of screens in front of him. Eli adjusted the angle of the 4 computer screens mounted to the desk, logged into the system, and, remaining faithful to his daily ritual, began rearranging the various software windows into positions with which he was comfortable. Like every other morning, he lamented that the developers of the security control software GeoNet had not yet built in a way for separate users to save their user interface preferences. But in truth, he kind of enjoyed the ritual, and anything else that would zap a few extra minutes from the day. Andre had already set the system to auto-rotation, which systematically looped through views of the various facilities, displaying the live video feeds on the gigantic wall of plastic, LEDs, and liquid crystal. Feeling settled, Eli brought up the online edition of Guns and Ammo and scanned the recent questions and comments in the site's forum. Eli volunteered as a moderator for the online forum and would visit the site several dozen times a day. He had poured many hours and dollars into this hobby over the past few years. As a collector, Eli had amassed a decent inventory of pistols, revolvers, and rifles, a luxury that was afforded to him by virtue of being single. He typed out a quick response, correcting a poster's misstatement that the velocity of the 5.56 NATO round was 2,800 feet per second. I believe the velocity of the 5.56 is 3,025 feet per second. You might be thinking of the 7.62, he wrote. Eli sent the reply, closed the web browser, and got up from the desk. He walked over to the back of the room and loaded a coffee pod into the Keurig machine set up on a small folding table. The door opened with an accompaniment of laughing voices and streaming light. "And this is the crown jewel of our department, our state-of-the-art video surveillance command and control center," Peterson said to the group. "Around here we call it the cockpit." One member of the group let out a slight chuckle before sheepishly trailing off, realizing Peterson was not making a joke. Startled by the loud entry, Eli's leg muscles twitched as if he were going to sprint and leap into his chair. Instead, he stood by the coffee machine and lifted his hand in a meek wave. "This is Mr. Butler. He is one of our specialists," Peterson continued. "Butler, bring up number 232. Eli rushed to his station and punched at the keyboard. The wall of screens flickered to display every angle covered by the 48 cameras installed in the downtown Los Angeles branch. This room was custom-built to span 2 floors in order to have the ceiling clearance to fit these 48 screens. Peterson ran through his usual spiel. Specifically to accommodate our largest coverage areas. 2 facilities have 48 camera angles: Los Angeles, California, and St. Petersburg, Russia. More than any other building in our purview. But that's not the impressive part. Each camera records a 360-degree view in 5K resolution, allowing us to pan and zoom into almost every inch of our 342 branches and facilities. "That's pretty impressive," one of the group said, while jotting down something in a leather pad folio. "Let me give you a demonstration. Do you see that man there, with the gray jacket and yellow tie, walking toward the staircase?" Peterson asked as the group nodded. "Butler, follow him." Eli's command of the system was uncanny. He could move between cameras and intuitively coerce the massive network to do his bidding. He grabbed a small box off the desk, which consisted of a joystick and a keypad with a dozen backlit buttons. One of the 4 screens in front of him flashed to a video feed and displayed an overhead view of the subject climbing a marble staircase, the word "output" superimposed over the image. Eli's eyes darted from the wall of video to the desktop monitor and back, but never glanced at the device in his hands. He punched at the various keys with his left hand as his right manipulated the joystick controller. The group murmured as Eli switched views, panned, and tracked the unknowing subject. He followed the man into an office and trained another camera on him as he sat down at a mahogany desk. Eli zoomed in tight as the man picked up a telephone receiver. Eli then abruptly panned the camera toward the wall and left it there. "Who did he call?" Peterson asked. The group didn't respond. After a brief pause for effect, Peterson motioned to Eli. Eli clicked the keys in a quick burst and the video ran back to the point at which the subject was approaching the desk. The video stopped and then ran forward, replaying the sequence of actions the group had just witnessed. The subject picked up the phone, but instead of the camera panning toward the blank wall, Eli pressed and turned the joystick, zooming in until the keypad of the phone filled the screen. The man tapped the 10 digits into the phone's keypad. Eli placed the controller onto the desktop, grabbed the mouse, and clicked a couple of on-screen buttons. The close-up view of the phone's keypad and the man's dialing finger played in a loop in slow motion. Peterson called out each number with a dramatic intonation. Eli sat back in his chair and turned to look at the group. The corners of his mouth turned up in a subtle, proud smile. Peterson also let a slight grin show, obviously pleased with the improvised skit he and his employee had just performed. "Any questions?" Peterson asked. Without waiting for a response, he continued, "Okay then. Let's move upstairs to the computer forensics department. I think you'll find it quite interesting." The group began filing out of the door. Peterson turned back toward Eli, his smile instantly leaving his face. "Your shift starts at 8 a.m., Butler. You and I will speak later," he said in a hushed voice. Uneasy, Eli turned his attention back to the video panels. Instead of re-engaging the auto-rotation, he punched in the numbers for several of the more active facilities: Miami, Chicago, Dallas. Business as usual. Satisfied that all was well in the world, he let the computer take over the rotation. He opened the Google Chrome browser and dragged the cursor toward the favorites bar labeled Guns and Ammo. Before he clicked, the loud screech of a hold-up alarm echoed through the cavernous room. White lights, mounted in the corners of the room, began flashing, and the 48 monitors switched to display the 35 cameras covering the interior and exterior of 2100 L Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. The busy D.C. branch had not been one of the usual false alarm offenders, but Eli was very familiar with the location. In addition to the public bank branch being located on the ground floor, the building housed one of the corporation's largest data centers. Eli glanced at each of the panels, observing people move about the nondescript offices, boardrooms, elevators, and hallways. The incessant screeching continued to uncomfortably rattle his eardrums. Then he saw it. Eli snatched the controller from the desk and, with a couple of keystrokes, plucked one of the main lobby camera views off the wall and deposited it onto his desktop monitor. He zoomed in and sat for a moment, staring motionless, with mouth agape. This was going to be a bad day. Chapter 2. Eli, his eyes pinned open in disbelief, reached for his headset and put it on, never glancing away from the scene unfolding on the screen in front of him. He clicked the mouse to dismiss the alarm, slid his hand across the desk until he felt the desktop telephone and pulled it closer to him. He began to dial 911, but hung up before the call went through, realizing the call would only connect him to the local NYPD dispatch center. He brought up a browser window and typed Washington, D.C. Police into the browser bar. Google listed Metropolitan Police Department of the District of Columbia at the top of the screen. He dialed the emergency number by feel as he turned his attention back to the live video feed. "D.C. Metro, call taker Ward, how can I assist you?" a woman answered. "Hi, yes, this is Eli Butler with IPFG Financial Security. I need to report a robbery in progress, 2100 L Street Northwest." "Yes, sir," Ward responded curtly. "We've received the alarm and have officers en route." "Okay, good. I'm looking at a live video feed. I can give you some more information if you need it," Eli said, not sure if he was overstepping his bounds. The line went quiet for a moment. Eli could hear muffled conversation in the background. "Yes, sir. Stay on the line and tell me what's going on. I'll relay any information to the dispatcher. Is everyone all right there?" she said. "I'm not there. I'm in New York City. But yes, it looks like it for the moment. Like I said, I'm looking at live video from inside." "Okay. What do you see, sir?" Peterson burst through the door. He flew into the room and stopped a few feet from Eli. "What's happening?" Peterson said loudly while looking over the wall of video screens. He turned to Eli for his response. Eli pointed at his headset mic and mouthed the words, "D.C. Metro." Peterson, abandoning his question, moved to the desk to the left of Eli and picked up the phone. He dialed a number and Eli heard him say frantically, "Get me Alders." Eli zoomed the camera out to get a wide-angle view of the entire lobby. He spoke to the call taker on the other end of the line. "There's 5 guys. I think they're guys. They're wearing masks and gloves, and dark hoodie sweatshirts with the hoods up over their heads. They're all armed." "You're sure they're armed?" Ward questioned. "Yes, absolutely armed, with assault rifles. If I had to guess, I'd say H&K 416s. But I guess they could be modified M4s or something else entirely. From this angle, I can see that at least 2 of them are carrying a sidearm." Eli zoomed in on the holster attached to one of the gunman's belts. Maybe Glocks or Smith M&Ps, hard to say. Eli could hear the woman calling out to someone else in the room. "Have 'em stage. This guy says there's 5 inside, heavily armed." "What are they doing now?" Ward asked, back into the phone. "They're moving around the lobby. It looks like they're forcing the customers to lie on the ground." Eli could see one of the gunmen raise his rifle into the air. Several muzzle flashes were visible on the high-resolution feed. "Oh no, they're blowing off rounds." "Sir, is someone shot?" Her tone became increasingly more charged. No, they're firing into the ceiling," he said. Eli heard a more muffled conversation. "Sir, can you describe the suspects?" "I told you, they're all identical, wearing masks, black or dark-colored hoodies and blue jeans. 2 of them have black backpacks." "What kind of masks?" Ward probed. "Ski masks?" "No, they're plastic, I think. All white, except for some green blood or something coming from the eyes. I'm taking some screenshots. If you want, I can email them." "Sir, officers are arriving now. Where in the building are they?" she asked, ignoring the suggestion. "They're in the main lobby. That's where the public bank branch is located. The rest of the building is just offices and computer equipment, server rooms and that kind of thing." Eli noticed that 2 of the men, the ones with the backpacks, had broken off from the others. One moved toward the front doors and the other headed to the rear exit. Eli manipulated his mouse and, after a few clicks, had rearranged 2 of the screens on the wall so the views of the front and rear doors were physically adjacent. Eli watched as both men rooted around in their backpacks and pulled out gray rectangular blocks. The men attached the blocks to the wall just inside their respective entryways. They inserted a silver cylinder into each block and unspooled a red rope. Eli thought it looked like the rope lights he had bought at Home Depot to run along the railing on his patio. He knew he was no expert in explosives, but he thought it would be pretty obvious to anyone what the 2 men were planning. "Tell the cops not to go in through the doors. I think they've set up explosives inside the doors," Eli warned. Eli heard Ward relaying the information. The 3 other men moved toward the teller counter, stepping over patrons who were lying on the floor, face down with hands interlaced at the back of their heads. Eli could see 3 tellers lying on the floor behind the counter. He glanced at the number of exterior feeds and could see several police cruisers gathering outside the building. Some of the officers had taken positions behind their vehicles and were pointing long guns toward the building. "They're at the teller counter saying something to the tellers. Looks like they're having them stand up." Eli watched as the 3 women behind the counter stood up and approached their tills with their hands extended into the air. All 3 were around the same age, late 20s, early 30s. Each gunman had his rifle trained on a different teller. "I think they're having them get the money from the drawers," Eli updated. All 6 stood completely still. 3 tellers with hands raised, 3 riflemen holding their weapons to their faces in a standoff tableau. Then, without warning, and with the precision of a firing squad, Eli saw a flash from all 3 muzzles simultaneously. The beige wall behind the teller area instantly turned a sickening shade of red. Small red spots appeared in the centers of the 3 women's light-colored blouses and rapidly grew until almost completely saturating the thin fabric of each garment. Eli could see the look of pain and disbelief on their faces, haunting expressions that emoted an indescribable sadness. The 3 women clutched at their chests and, one after another, slumped over or fell to the ground, motionless. No, Eli cried. "Why?" "What happened, sir?" Ward asked with reciprocal urgency. Eli looked to his left to see Peterson staring at the video wall. His right hand lay in his lap, still squeezing the handset of the phone. Eli felt as if the horror of what they just witnessed had entered his body through his eyes and wrapped around his soul like a boa constrictor. Peterson's eyes welled up, and Eli covered most of his face with both hands. "They didn't take the money," Eli said quietly, half to himself and half to Peterson. "They didn't take the money," he repeated more loudly into the headset microphone. "You've got to get in there," Eli said, the pace and pitch of his voice rising back to peak levels. "They shot him. They killed him for no reason." Who's shot?" Ward interrupted. "The tellers, all at once. They executed them." They just freaking executed them. Eli could feel himself shaking. It was as if the innocent women weren't actually dead until he said the words, solidifying the reality. They're moving. I think they're going upstairs, he said, as he watched the 3 shooters begin to move past the elevators, toward the access door for the stairwell. You've got to get in there now. Is there another entrance? Ward asked, her voice remaining calm and collected. No, not at ground level. There is an access door to the stairwell on the roof, if someone could get up there. For a moment, Eli thought of the ridiculousness of the proposition, but then considered that the Washington, D.C. Police Department probably had a helicopter. The roof might be a viable option. Do you have a helicopter? Well, yes. But, sir, I'm only relaying the information. How the officers approach this is up to the commanders on the ground. Can you still see them? Eli abandoned his computer, stood up, and walked around the desk. He leaned back against the sturdy piece of furniture and stared up at the towering wall of light. Okay, I'll just describe everything that's happening. You do with it what you can. Right now, the 2 guys with the backpacks are still in the lobby. The other 3 are climbing the stairs. There was no interruption from the other end of the line. One of the backpack guys is crouching down over one of the people lying on the floor of the lobby, an older guy with gray hair and blue shirt. The guy's standing up. The old guy, I mean. The backpack guy is leading him toward the front. Eli hoped he wasn't about to witness another senseless slaughter. He glanced at the stairwell monitors. The 3 guys in the stairwell are moving on to the 3rd floor. That floor is part of the data center. There's nothing on 3 but some climate-controlled computer rooms. An employee sat at a desk just outside the secure data center area. The young man appeared to be typing away at a keyboard, unaware of the hold-up alarm that had been triggered in the branch below. Do we have a phone number for that guy? Eli pointed at the screen as he turned back to Peterson, who was still busy updating his bosses by telephone. Eli saw the 3 gunmen traveling down the hallway toward the oblivious young man. With the 3 of them lined up side by side, Eli could see that one of the 3 men was significantly taller than the other 2. They're moving toward the data center. When they turn the next corner, they're going to run right into an employee who doesn't look like he knows they're coming, Eli said to Ward. They're turning the corner. They shot him. They shot him in the face. He's still moving. No, never mind. One of the other 2 shot him again. 4 or 5 times. Point blank. Christ, these guys are complete savages. He was amazed at the callousness and the complete lack of hesitation displayed by the masked men. The largest of the 3 had barely rounded the corner before he raised his rifle and casually murdered the young employee. Eli could hear commotion on the other end of the line but did not get a verbal response from the call taker. He felt himself becoming more effective at pushing the gruesomeness of what he was seeing out of his mind and focusing on his task of objective narration. They're taking something out of the dead guy's pocket. It's a key card. They're using it to open the door to the server room. He switched his attention to the monitors showing the inside of the secure area. There were multiple cameras covering the corridors between rows of large computer cabinets. Through the glass doors of the cabinets, blue, yellow, and green LED lights blinked and flickered. Eli continued to track the 3 men. One of the 2 shorter guys stayed in the hallway. The other is staying by the door, just inside the server room. The taller guy just pulled out a drawer with a keyboard from one of the racks. He's typing on it. Eli realized the masked men weren't looking for money. This place probably holds a ton of customer information. Bank accounts, credit cards. They're trying to steal it all, I bet, Eli said, inserting his own theories into the situation. Okay, listen, Ward said, finally re-entering the conversation. The helicopter is being deployed. It's about 10 minutes out. We're going to need your help. When the time comes, we're going to patch you in to the SWAT commander directly. While he and his team are making entry from the roof, you'll be the eyes. Okay? Ward asked rhetorically. Yes, of course, Eli said. Keep doing what you're doing, Peterson interjected in a hushed voice as he stood up from the desk. I'll be back. Corporate's filled in. The jet is on its way. We're setting up a war room in the conference room next door, but be prepared. This room may be getting real crowded real quick, he said as he hurried out the door. Eli looked over the screens and noticed that while he was watching the server room, The two masked men in the lobby had lined up all 8 hostages, in 2 lines of 4, in front of the 2 front doors. Eli noticed that the gunmen themselves had not crossed in front of the glass doors, even when planting the explosives. He assumed they were aware that snipers would have already been in position, waiting for an opportunity to take them out. The hostages are lined up by the front doors. The officers should be able to see them through the glass. Eli worried that the gunmen were staging a show, getting ready to execute the 8 hostages in full view of the police and, God forbid, the news media. He realized why Peterson had been frantically conferring with corporate management. Something Peterson had said on the phone had finally registered in his brain. PR nightmare was the phrase he used. Eli had no doubt there would be backlash. The guys on the 3rd floor are still in the same spots. He continued with his update. Are you still there? Still here. Go ahead, Ward responded. The 2 in the lobby are standing against the wall on either side of the front doors. The hostages are all still standing there. Wait, they're moving toward the door. They're walking out the front doors. The guys in the masks aren't moving. They're just letting all of them leave. The tone of Eli's voice relayed his disbelief. Through the external cameras, Eli could see the hostages emerging through the doors. As each hit the open air, they began sprinting away from the building. Several officers came out from their cover and pulled the fleeing people away and toward a large coach bus, painted with the words Metropolitan Police Mobile Command Center. Several officers intercepted them as they boarded the bus, cloaking them in large red blankets. They're all out, Eli said to Ward triumphantly. Is there anyone left in the building? Ward asked. Eli scanned the screens and quickly counted out a rough figure. There are about 30 employees in the building on different floors, but no one's left on the 1st and 3rd. Eli paused at the gravity of why no one was left in those areas. The guys in the lobby still haven't moved. I mean, at all. The 3 upstairs are moving down the hallway toward the stairwell. The helicopter is in the air and is 2 minutes out. We're working on getting the patch in place now. Okay, got it. They're in the stairwell, going back down. They passed by floor 2. That's good news, at least. He paused. And they're coming back into the lobby. Eli watched as the 2 masked men by the front doors moved toward the center of the bank floor. They flanked the other 3 men. Eli felt like he was watching a silent movie of a military color guard without the flags. The 5 men pushed back the hoods from their heads, exposing bald, pasty white scalps. What the hell are they doing? Eli said out loud. They dropped their rifles on the ground and are standing at attention. They're looking right at me. Looking at you? Ward said. Looking right at the camera. This is creepy. Those weird masks don't help, Eli replied. Eli really did feel uneasy. Even though he knew it was impossible, he felt like they could see him watching them. In any case, it was obvious that they knew someone was. Okay. Sir, I'm disconnecting. You're being patched in with Sergeant Del Grasso. Thank you, Ward said with a sigh of relief that her responsibility was being released. Eli stared into the screen, glared into the white plastic faces, green tears streaming down the cheeks, and wondered what kind of monsters hid behind them. Then he witnessed something he never saw coming, never would have been able to concoct in his wildest imagination. In one fluid, almost imperceptible movement, all 5 men simultaneously drew their pistols from the holsters, jammed them under their chins, and pulled the triggers. The tops of their bald heads exploded, sending a red mist of blood and brain matter into the air. The mist lingered as the 5 limp bodies fell to the floor. No need, Miss Ward, Eli said solemnly. It's over. Chapter 3. A constant flood of sweat crested Blake Brier's brow and flowed unimpeded into his eyes. Blake focused on the stinging feeling and fought the urge to blink. He was accustomed to extreme, unblinking focus under the crushing stress of life and death. As quickly as the grit surged inside of him, it receded into the nostalgia from which it came. He exhaled fully, as if performing a meditation ritual. As his lungs expanded, He smirked at himself for the almost contrived sense of contentment he felt. A contentment he always felt while lying under a 280-pound barbell. The sweat in Blake Brier's eyes on this day was of his own making, his own daily test. No lives hung in the balance. Those days were a million miles behind him. Blake replaced the bar on its perch after his final rep. He laid still for several moments as his mind wandered. What the hell is the purpose of eyebrows? Blake devoted another half a second of his attention to the notion before he became conscious of the fact that his mind had wandered. For many years his mind had worked in a peculiar way. He had the ability to focus on complex problems for hours on end, but, absent such stimulation, was struck by what he often referred to as a touch of the old ADD. Of course, he had never been diagnosed. This may or may not have had something to do with the fact that he hadn't been to a doctor's office in years. Blake hopped off the bench, toweled off, and headed for the juice bar. He would shower at home. It was only a 5-minute drive, and he wasn't particularly fond of the locker room crowd. A bunch of 60 to 70-year-old men who never seemed to actually migrate out to the gym floor. They'd unpack what seemed like 4 years' worth of toiletry products and commence with their work, which, as far as Blake could tell, consisted of standing around buck-naked and staring at themselves in the mirror. Blake got in line behind a small 20-something woman wearing a matching pink and black spandex outfit. The woman turned to glance at him, flashing a quick smile before returning to dictating her order of a soy banana flax kale power shake. The woman was in pretty good shape, but Blake calculated that at her age, she probably didn't have to put a whole lot of work into it. At 43 years old, he was no longer the beneficiary of such perks of youth. The woman paid for her shake and hustled by. She flashed one more quick smile his way. He sauntered up to the counter with a swagger fueled by the woman's second glance. Still got it. He often got that type of reaction from women, but he knew it probably had less to do with some animal magnetism and more to do with his calm and confident boyish aura. He was often told he had a friendly face. His 6'3", 230-pound frame might have seemed imposing in other settings, but not in this room. The juice heads crowding the dumbbell racks against the back wall of the gym dwarfed him. What did stand out, Blake figured, was not just his bright red hair, but also the bright red beard he had been growing for the past 4 months. If anything, that's worthy of a double take. Blake ordered a protein shake and swiped his debit card through the card reader. The machine spit back the harsh response. Declined. Don't tell me. Another fraud alert. He replaced the card in his wallet and produced a credit card. Swipe. Declined. Blake was not easily rattled, and this moment would certainly not be an exception, but he did feel the slightest warmth flush through his skin in spite of himself. He was well acquainted with the types of technical errors that crop up in payment networks, but he didn't particularly like the idea of appearing to anyone as some kind of deadbeat. A crumb bum, as his father used to say. The cashier shot him a dirty look, but what he didn't know was that Blake typically kept around $200,000 in his bank account. Old habits. You never know when you're going to need a ton of cash, and quick. But the fact remained that Blake only carried 2 cards, and both had rudely rejected him. The cashier tightly gripped the freshly prepared protein shake as if he was afraid that Blake was going to try to grab it and run. I'll cover him. A soft, sweet voice came from over Blake's shoulder. The sound of her voice slipped into his ears and rattled around in his gut. He knew that voice. He knew it well. Joe, he said, before turning around to confirm his prediction. It had been 10 years since he'd laid eyes on Anya Kohler, but he couldn't find a single difference in her appearance. If Blake didn't know Anya was 38 years old, he'd swear she was the same 28-year-old girl he had once shared his bed with. Her blonde hair and sharp German features were every bit as striking as the day he first met her. How've you been, Blake? Great. Really great. Wow, you look great. Ugh, too many greats. Yeah, you too. Blake's mind wandered back to the day that Anya Kohler broke off their 5-year relationship and stepped into the taxicab she summoned to take her to the Washington, D.C. townhouse they once shared. At some point, he had made a mental list of the things he regretted in his life. Although he was grateful it was a short list, he tended to remind himself of it frequently. There were no more than 3 things on his list. Watching the girl he called Jo drive out of his life was one of them. Anya picked up a protein bar and paid for it, along with Blake's shake. She handed it to him. "Thank you, Jo. I've got to figure out what the hell's going on with my cards. So what are you doing here? Are you back?" "Well, yeah, I guess I'm back." Anya glanced at her watch. "But I've got to run. Got called in. We'll catch up. Just call me." Anya scribbled a telephone number on the back of her business card. Blake took the card and, once again, watched her leave. He looked at the front of the card. It read, "Anya Kohler, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation." She's still at it. Blake leaned against the wall next to a trash can while he quickly sucked down his shake. He tossed the plastic cup into the trash and had turned to leave when he noticed that no one in the gym seemed to be moving. They were all standing with their necks craned toward the nearest flat-panel screen mounted above a treadmill or stair climber. He walked over to a screen which, a few moments before, was showing an old episode of Judge Joe Brown, but had since been preempted by talking heads and scrolling news banners. He zoned in and absorbed the details, or pure speculation, being dramatically delivered by correspondents who rushed to the scene to catch whatever percentage of TV ratings were still up for grabs. IPFG. Interesting.